Now let's turn our attention to another demagogue. Donald Trump, former US president, now found guilty of sexual abuse. The case was filed by journalist E. Jean Carroll. She said Donald Trump raped her in 1996. Now the jury has found that he sexually abused her. Not the same as rape, but a significant verdict nonetheless. Trump has been asked to pay Carroll $5 million in damages, and this is a civil case, so he won't go to jail. But it's quite an indictment. Although Trump has called it a witch hunt and a disgrace. The question is, how will it impact his presidential bid? He wants to run for president in the 2024 election. Being found guilty of sexual abuse may not help, but then again, this is America, so we can't be sure of what will happen. Also, Trump tends to benefit from such episodes. You may remember what happened in the month of March. He became the first former US president to be indicted in a criminal case. This was about a porn star. Her name is Stormy Daniels. Trump paid her money to keep her quiet. They call it hush money. He made the payment, but did not show it in his books. So he was indicted. Now he's been found guilty of sexual abuse. Of course, he's denied all the charges. Throughout these cases, in fact, his demeanor was typical Trump, full of vitriol. Let me show you something from his deposition in October last year. It's just been made public. Take a look at this.
I still don't know this woman. I think she's a whack job. I have no idea. I don't know anything about this woman other than what I read in stories and what I hear. I know nothing about her, but I know nothing about her. I think she's sick, mentally sick. She said that I did something to her that never took place. There was no anything. I know nothing about this nut job.
He called her a whack job, nut job, and mentally sick. Charming. Of course, this isn't the first time that Trump has been found being vulgar while describing women. There was a famous Access Hollywood tape that went viral before the 2016 presidential election. Trump was in a bus talking about his disgusting acts. That tape did not stop him from becoming the president of the US. But it may have helped nail him in this rape trial. He was questioned about it, and his answer was distasteful, to say the least.
I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. Just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab them by the pussy. You can do anything. That's what you said, correct?
Well, historically, that's true with stars.
It's true with stars that they can grab women by the pussy?
Well, that's what it's. If you look over the last million years, I guess that's been largely true. Not always, but largely true. Unfortunately or fortunately.
Fortunately, really. As you can imagine, the jury unanimously declared Trump guilty of sexual abuse. But that isn't the end of the sordid saga. Trump, of course, is going to appeal.
Yeah, I mean, look, strange verdict. This was a rape claim. It was a rape case all along, and the jury rejected that, but made other findings. So we'll obviously be appealing those other findings. And at the end of the day, while, you know, it was strange, part of me was obviously very happy that Donald Trump was not branded a rapist. I didn't think there should be any liability findings, so we'll pursue it. We'll pursue that.
He says he's happy Trump wasn't branded a rapist. So sexual abuser is a badge of honor? The sick part is that it might be for his voter base. Trump's Access Hollywood tape was actually lauded by some of his supporters. They've dismissed his Stormy Daniels hush money case as politically motivated, and most likely this one too will be defended by his rabid fan base. After the verdict, Donald Trump put out this statement on his social media platform. It's called Truth Social. He set it up after being removed from Twitter. Trump says the judge in this case was biased. He says the venue of the trial was completely partisan and that it was the greatest political witch hunt of all time. What Donald Trump did not mention is that he was found guilty by the jury, a jury made up of ordinary people. Will American voters see past the sea of excuses next year? Trump probably believes so. He's shown no indication that he'll step out of the presidential race. And when it comes to neighbors, India has been particularly unlucky. If Pakistan is a ticking time bomb, China is a source of perpetual provocation. Let me show you the latest example. A racist social media trend targeting India. Look at this. These are posts from Weibo, from an official account of the Chinese government. These posts mock India. There are male characters in turbans portrayed in blackface. The women are white. They've posted videos too. They ridicule Indian movies.
天天盯着太阳穴，越晒越黑不奇怪。为了找我都算白，仔细看我帅着谁。没长得我说不来，可是那个有点大。
This is in very poor taste and blatantly racist. And let me repeat, it comes from the Chinese government. Which part of the government? China's Ministry of Public Security. It's the principal police authority in China. And what are these clips about? Road safety, apparently. The government of China has launched a campaign teaching citizens about road safety rules. How? By insulting Indians, by demeaning Indian culture. You know what this shows? This is how the Chinese state sees India and Indians. And the comments and reactions to these videos betray Chinese racism. Let me show you one comment by a Chinese Weibo user. I'm quoting. Only the men in the video wore blackface because Indian men are regarded as clowns in China, but Indian women are regarded as beauties. I'm not making any of this up. Also, this is not new. China's disdain for India. Multiple researchers have documented it. The Chinese have a predominantly negative perception of India. They call India the yellow sick man, and they see India as a troublemaker. Recently, when India overtook China as the world's most populous country, do you know what the Chinese response was? The official Chinese response. They said quality is more important than quantity. It shows that China sees India as an inferior nation and its population as second rate. These racist videos are a manifestation of that same mindset. Why should we care? Because China's superiority complex reflects in its actions too. It sees itself as a great power, the so-called middle kingdom between heaven and earth, and it sees India as a junior player. So China tries to contain India by border incursions in the Himalayas and provocations on the high seas. I'll give you the latest example. India and ASEAN nations held maritime drills. This was a week-long exercise involving 9 ships, 6 aircraft and more than 1,800 personnel. The drills happened in the South China Sea. Guess who else was in these waters? Chinese militia. Their boats and vessels were spotted in the same area about 100 nautical miles away from where the drills were happening. Reports say Indian officials were monitoring the situation. They were tracking the movements of at least 5 militia boats. Do these boats belong to the PLA? Well, China says they don't. It issued a statement today calling the accusations quote-unquote groundless, but the facts speak for themselves. These vessels have a clear connection to Beijing, and China has a history of gunboat diplomacy. There are hundreds of such ships and boats in South China Sea. What purpose do they serve? They exercise Chinese control over disputed territories. The boats that showed up near the Indian drills belong to a specific fleet, a fleet called the Cheong San Sha Yu Militia. And this name gives away many details. Cheong means the ships fall under the jurisdiction of the Hainan province in China. Sansha conveys that they belong to Sansha, which is a city in Hainan. And finally, Yu means that these are fishing vessels, although they do more than fishing. In fact, let me take you back to a report from 2016. It was published by China Defense News, a media outlet run by the PLA. The report indicated that there is a garrison in Sansha, the city I just talked about. It hosts bases for the militia force. Trainings are conducted here. What kind of trainings? Members of the militia force are trained in navigation, communication, the use of weapons, even surveillance. And by deploying such militia, China maintains plausible deniability. It uses force at sea without taking responsibility. The 20th century had oil. The 21st century has chips, what we call semiconductors. They're everywhere, in our phones, in our cars, in our appliances, even in our weapons. Modern life is simply not possible without chips. But like oil, not every country makes chips. In 2021, India tried to enter this market. The government announced an incentive program to attract investors. How much money are we talking about? $10 billion. But the program had a drawback. Companies only had 45 days to apply. If they did not make the deadline, they wouldn't be eligible. The result? There was only limited success. So now the government is reopening that program, this time with a tweak. The 45-day window has been removed. Companies can keep applying until the $10 billion are used up. Technicalities aside, what does this move signal? That the government is keen on chips. It wants to insert India into the global chip supply chain. And what does that look like? Well, you can divide the chip market into three parts: designing, manufacturing, and assembling. This process is not centralized. It's spread across the world. Virtually all of the chip designing is done in the United States. These designs are then manufactured elsewhere. Taiwan, for instance, is a top producer. It makes up around 50% of the market. South Korea is second with 17%. Japan is third. China is fourth. The final step is assembling these chips. In simple words, putting them inside devices. And this is where China is miles ahead. They have more factories, so they assemble more devices. But that's not where the real money is. If you want the big bucks, you must either design or manufacture. That's where the skill is, and by extension, that's where the money is. So how big is this chip market? Around $570 billion today. By the end of this decade, around $1 trillion, and I would say that's a conservative estimate. So the potential is immense, which is why every country is rushing to capitalize. It's the new gold rush. But where does India feature in this race? In 2021, the government was very ambitious. It was expecting at least a dozen chip factories by 2024. Safe to say that's not happening. But one major deal has been signed. Taiwan's Foxconn and Vedanta are setting up a plant in Gujarat. The project is worth $19.5 billion. It's a good start, we say. But the key is to build on it. As of now, India's chip market is worth around $27 billion. By 2026, it could be $55 billion. So the industry is expected to double in the next 3 years. Some factors do work in India's favor. Number one, abundance of skilled and affordable labor. That is key to dominating the chip industry, especially when it comes to designing and assembly. Number two, the political climate. You see, most countries are concerned about Taiwan's dominance in chip making. If China invades, that market would collapse. So there is a global push to diversify, and India benefits from that. The US has already offered support for India's chip industry. In March, both sides signed a memorandum of understanding. It talks about supply chains and partnerships. The Quad also announced a supply chain project. It was unveiled in 2021. It hasn't really moved forward. Factor number three that adds to India's advantage: India's local demand. We're talking about the most populous economy in the world. So a lot of these chips and devices will be consumed locally. Those are the advantages. But there are challenges too. The biggest challenge is China, of course. Beijing also dreams of dominating the global chip market. They have a head start. They also have a bigger checkbook. China's chip market is worth around $192 billion, which is 7 times the Indian market. They're also readying a new package. It's worth around $143 billion. My point is, China will always outspend India. That's challenge number one. Challenge number two is the nature of the market. It's almost like a cartel. Hard to enter, even harder to leave. If India signs on, it could become stuck in a US-dominated grouping, and that could mean a lot of conditions like labor standards, green targets, anti-corruption measures. India has always preferred setting these itself. So will it be comfortable inside a chip cartel? Well, that's a question for the government to think about. Either way, one thing is clear: sitting on the sidelines is not an option. If it's not possible to match China's spending, then New Delhi must focus on other strategies, like creating chip alliances or leveraging its ties with the US and Japan. It must also think about what role it wants to play in this market. Reports say the government is keen on manufacturing, but that's a tough sell. You see, making chips is all about staying ahead of the curve. At the top, you have cutting edge. At the bottom, you have trailing edge. Taiwan and South Korea closely guard the cutting edge technology. So should India invest time and money in manufacturing? Or should it focus on designing? All of these questions will be key to India's chip project. We'll be watching. For our last story tonight, let's talk about parenting. They say it takes a village to raise a child, but thanks to medical science now, it can also take the DNA of 3 parents to have one. That's right, DNA from 3 individuals to produce 1 baby. And the procedure can be life-saving. We're talking about 3 parent babies. It is a real thing. And the UK just got its first such baby, although it's not a new phenomenon. The first 3 parent baby was born in the year 2016. And since then, many more have been brought to life. This only goes on to show how far science has come. But the procedure is not without risks. Here's a report.
Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. How many times did you rote learn that in school? The effort that went into learning it is inversely proportional to the use of this knowledge. After all, mitochondria facts aren't really a party starter. But for this story, they will come in handy. Because we're going to talk about 3-parent babies. You heard that right. Not 1, not 2, but 3-parent babies. Here's how. Babies, like all organisms, are made of DNA, and the DNA of children comes from their parents. So, with 3-parent babies, the process is the same. Except instead of 2, 3 parents give their DNA. The father who gives the sperm, the mother who gives the egg, and a female donor. So what does this female donor give? Her DNA. Then a baby will be born like in any IVF birth. That's in vitro fertilization, where the embryo forms outside the womb in a lap dish, and then is placed inside the womb of the mother. And this process is called mitochondrial donation treatment. But you may wonder, if the mother is already offering an egg, why is another woman's DNA required? And why only a woman donor? This is where mitochondria come in. What's that, you ask? Mitochondria are like tiny compartments that are inside nearly every cell of our body. They convert food into usable energy, at least the decent ones. But sometimes they malfunction. And the defective mitochondria are really bad for the body. They not only fail to give us energy, but can cause brain damage, heart failure, blindness, and muscle wasting. These diseases are incurable and genetic, so they pass on to children. About 1 in 6,000 babies are born with mitochondrial diseases every year. And it's fatal to them, most dying within hours of their birth. So families have lost multiple children to this. So obviously, parents want to protect their babies from this. And for them, this method is the only solution. People inherit all their mitochondria from a woman, and that's why they need the genes of a 3rd female donor, even if only 0.1% of the baby's genes come from her, because this brings in the donor's healthy mitochondria, not the faulty ones, and a healthy baby is born, which is exactly what's happened in the UK. For the first time in history, a 3-parent baby has been born. But this isn't the first such case in the world. In 2016, a 3-parent baby was born in Mexico. In 2017, another was born to parents in Ukraine. And in 2019, a similar case was seen in Greece. So the science is clearly picking up across the world, but at a slow pace, because it isn't without risks. This technique is fairly new. There are health concerns, which is why it's banned in countries like America and Canada. Then there are ethical and moral concerns because it's tweaking natural biology. In a few cases, the process is unsuccessful too. But while the concerns are valid, there are also the consequences of not making use of this technique. Because for thousands of families, this is their only hope. What we need is balance. How to achieve it is the challenge. So, Three's Company or crowd? The choice is yours.
And there they go. It looks like
The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting. Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony.